All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, here as springtime is moving on. It's warm up here in Pittsburgh, thank goodness. So we're all happy and we're smiling. And that makes me, of course, think about data products. So we're going to talk about data products today, all wrapped up, why data products rule. We'll be talking to David Mariani of AtScale fame and our new friend, Lee Feinberg, who's got his own consultancy, and we'll talk to him about what he's working on as well. And let me just start off with some commentary on what do we mean by data products? Well, a data product could be a spreadsheet if it's a very simple one. A data product could be anything in the insurance industry to help you configure price quote. That could be a data product. It could be something in the research field. It could be really in any industry. But the idea is that it's a finished product. So it's not something that you have to assembly required kind of thing. You get this thing, it works, it's done. You ask it questions, you get answers. That's really what we mean by a data product. And the reason we talk about this now is because historically, we've talked all about the plumbing and the engines underneath that drive, that create the end result, which is viewed as a data product. So the data warehouse or the OLAP cube or the data mesh or the data fabric, all the ETL. Well, this is all the plumbing, the stuff under the hood. I remember Dave Wells taught me that concept about 20 years ago. He referred to under the hood technology. And he said a lot of that stuff is going to be like under the hood technology in the future because who cares? The business doesn't care how it got a certain way. I mean, they care in wanting to know that it's accurate and reliable and auditable, but really they just want to use something. They want to use information to further their business. And I think that a lot of this, a lot of the buzzwords tend to spin out of new vendors or new ideas. Then they get co-opted by everybody, and all of a sudden everyone's doing this. It's like data fabric. Well, who isn't doing data fabric? Data mesh, there are like 87 different definitions for data mesh. That's not productive. That's not good for the business, and we want to help the business. So to start us off, I'll bring in David Mariani from AtScale. I see you nodding, so you get where I'm coming from. Well, how do you define data products, and why do you think that should be the focus?
Well, I love your synopsis for this about the analogy to the car. You shouldn't have to understand, how the transmission works or the rack and pinion steering. You purchase a car and you drive it. So, for me, a data product is a combination of obviously a combination of data, but also a combination of data and some output. So you kind of mentioned some of the examples of it. Even ChatGPT can be considered a data product,
Right,
right?
right, sure.
Its interface is an English interface to ask it questions, and so typically a data product is something that's interactive. It's something that is definitely user focused. It tends to be actionable, so it tends to be analytical in nature. So it's just going to be something that is useful. And they live everywhere. So it's and I'm of course we're in the business of helping people build those data products to in a consistent fashion where they can be deployed in a number of different sort of environments, a number of different tools. But you're right to say that, we've sort of forced people to sort of build their own data products in a one-off basis for a long time where they did have to understand the transmission and how the rack and
Right,
pinion steering worked.
right.
So we've asked a lot of people to be able to do anything to make decisions, and we force them to really be technical experts to do so. So I
Hmm.
think that, packaging data and analytics as a data product that's ready to use, ready to eat, whatever, ready to consume is a really important advancement.
Yeah, I think so too. And I had this another epiphany the other day when I was just thinking about all this stuff like I do, sit around thinking about data and technology. And if you think about photo manipulation and how 20 odd years ago you'd go by Photoshop and it was an incredibly sophisticated application at the time. I mean, you really had to sit there and read manuals and pay attention and spend days, even weeks trying to learn this stuff to know even what the heck to do because you had all these different options, diffusion layers, all this kind of stuff to deal with. Well, now on your new Samsung phone, I can hold my finger down in a picture and it does an automatic clipping pattern around the person. So I can just save that as a separate sticker, they call them. And I think what's going to happen in the data world with all these machine learning and AI algorithms, it's going to get that easy. You're going to be able to just look at your set of customer data and then go, boom, just drag and drop some icon onto that file, and it's going to be a filter of some kind to segment your file or to look for the highest value customers or whatever. My point is, it's going to be that easy to leverage these analytical capabilities that historically have required a data science platform like Dataiku or something. It's just going to be commoditized. And that's pretty interesting stuff because when you can commoditize what 2 years ago cost you $500,000 and now banging out on your phone, I mean, like that, I think that's the kind of disruption that we're seeing right now. But what do you think, David?
It's like so Eric, look, I would love to have a chat interface for business, right? I would love to be able to you said drag and drop. I think that like, when we think of how data gets consumed today through BI tools where it is like the drag and drop and it's putting pills here and there and then you get this visualization. It's like I think the whole interface for asking questions is going to change. And I think that the large language models have really sort of really sort of starting to train us to just ask questions of data. But there's a big gap between where we are with a chat GPT, which can crawl the internet and give you sort of, answers to a lot of things, but not specifically about your business
Right,
because it doesn't have access to your data.
right.
So I think that the interface is going to change a lot to make it to make analytics available to a lot more people than they have today, at least within the enterprise.
I think so too, and maybe I'll use this opportunity to throw out my latest buzzword topic I came up with when I was flying out to Boomi World. I just thought to myself about what you just mentioned. Basically, I thought to myself, the ultimate interface for an executive would be this kind of chat-based
Mhm.
layer where you can just ask questions of your business. So I'm thinking to myself, wouldn't it be cool for a forward-looking company to carve out, let's say, 10% or 20% of their data center, deploy their own small language model that is suited for their vertical, like manufacturing or healthcare or financial services, because they're out there. There's a whole bunch of these SLMs that are being worked on, and then train it on all of your core systems, your ERP, your CRM, your Salesforce, your customer support, all that stuff. Train all that, and then set up Kafka topics from those systems into a vector database adjacent to this LLM or SLM GUI. And then the executive just sits around and says, how are we doing in the APAC region? How is our marketing working? Are we on plan? Any kind of question at all, and get all kinds of answers. Yes, some will have to be vetted, but I bet you 80% are going to be really accurate or even higher than that. So in terms of decision making and sort of stochastic discovery, that's an incredibly powerful tool, and you don't have to wait for stuff. Like I talked to a CEO of a big company, and I was trying to get him to help me do sales enablement for some big accounts. And I've got a friend who is at a very large organization and is just going to get a big promotion. And I was like, hey, when do you have this account? He said, I don't know. I'm like, well, why don't you know? Like, if you had the executive cockpit, you'd assess, do we have this account? Enter. Yes. And the salesperson is this, and these are the last few transactions, et cetera. What do you think about that? Is that pie in the sky or is that coming sometime soon, David?
Well, look, it's a we were just talking about it literally today, because and for the enterprise, the big challenge is this, is that LLMs, they can be wrong, but they're confidently wrong. In other words, you
Right.
don't know they're
That
wrong
is true.
because they come
That's
out, it's
right.
like, this is what the answer is, right?
Right. That's right.
And 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 so what we need to do for
That's
business,
funny.
we can't be wrong, right? If the CEO asks, what's my gross margin for this product, and he makes a decision based on that, and it's wrong,
Right.
it's probably going to be the last time he ever uses that as that data or that interface to actually make a decision. So I think what we need to do is that we need to build in additional sort of tools on top of this that
Hmm.
basically give feedback on the answer.
Hmm.
To do and almost like and almost ask follow-up questions to the user. Is this what you meant? Does this look right? I mean,
Right.
something so that we don't sort of present this aura of absolute confidence that we're
Right.
delivering the right answer when we could be hallucinating.
Right. There's no doubt. And I think a lot of that is going to come in the RAG models, this retrieval augmented generation. I think you're going to have, just as you suggest, checks and balances. I might have a friend of mine who has built out a 5-person advisory board in GPT where he's got his finance GPT, his marketing, his sales, his administration, like, and they all like debate about stuff. I'm like, dude, you are deep in it, man. But that's
Right.
cool stuff. As long as you suggest it is for stochastic purposes, for discovery, for learning, instead of making a big decision on something that has to be correct. As long
Mhm.
as we're in that domain, I think it's an absolute slam dunk to use this stuff. But let's bring in Lee Feinberg and tell me your company name again. Data Decision
Decision
Viz,
Viz.
right? Decision Viz. I knew I'd remember it. From DecisionViz, Lee Feinberg, tell us what you think about these data products and where you think things are going.
Yeah, I kind of have a couple of different opinions, like most people in the space, because I approach it in a different way. But with respect to what we're talking about, if you think about executives, part of the problem, I think, in the world, and this is just being human, is most people are not analysts and most people are not analytical either. And
Right.
so I think there is, it's great that maybe even an executive could do this, the CEO, whomever, but depending on what their capability is, they may only get surface level answers, right? Or think at the surface level when there's a lot more to need to actually make a decision when
Right.
it comes to, like you said, I want to know if we have an account, or I want to know what our profit is, et cetera. Not enough to really go on. And so you still need people or a mechanism to really get deeper into understanding what the data is, what it means, what the implications are of making certain decisions, which, you might not be doing just by asking simple questions like that. So I think there's a lot more to enabling this kind of capability, but I think it will change the way we do our work, right? I live in a world of that Dave described, right? Of drag and drop using software like that. And I'd love if I could extend some of that to a voice interface, only because I think I can do it faster.
Hmm.
I can think of it that way rather than like, I want to do this, but I have to do all these different incantations to make that happen, right?
Hmm.
Which is just burdensome, or I have to know how to do that in the software. And I don't really want to be a software expert. I want to be an expert at thinking about things and getting to understanding what the data is.
Yeah.
But right now it's necessary only because we've only evolved it that far, right? But it's much better than just working with cells in a spreadsheet.
Right. Well, that's true. And absolutely, I agree with what we just said right there. And I'll throw out another fun conversation I had with a guy who is director of data governance for a very large organization in the US. And he said that, we went and played with ChatGPT and we asked it a question and it gave us an interesting answer. And it said the confidence score was like 59%. And everyone's like, oh, well, we can't go with that because the confidence score is like 59%. But then someone on his team said, well, let's ask it why the score is so low. I said, all
Yeah.
right. So they asked it, and it
Mm.
said, well, because this data came through null, and this data set didn't look correct, and this didn't work right, et cetera. And they're like, well, bingo. Now we know what to go fix, right? So even though the answer wasn't very confident, it then told them what was the problem, and they went to address it. I mean, you just think about the time historically spent in meetings and the latency from the meeting to action and from action to the meeting, a lot of that latency is going away, I think, with this new way of doing business. Because, for example, in the article I wrote about this executive cockpit concept, I'll throw this over to Lee again. You say, how are we doing with marketing? Are we getting enough leads, et cetera? And it gives you the report and says, no, you're spending too much. You're not getting enough quality leads for that money that you're spending. And okay, then you tell it, okay, get a meeting with my top VPs sometime next week and bring up these 3 reports and come up with some charts. Enter. And it goes boom. It goes and finds the little AI agent goes out there and finds the calendar, says, okay, 2:30 on next Tuesday. Boom, sends the invites, delivers the charts and the graphs and the reports, and then you all show up ready to go. I mean, that is like wildly different from anything we've ever seen before. The meetings are going to be, I think, significantly more productive. Very, very few games are going to be played, which is what people do, right? When they don't have their work done or
Mhm.
whatever. There's all kind of stuff that happens. But Lee, what do you think about that? Just changing how business gets done with these very sophisticated data products, which is what these models are. What do you think, Lee?
Well, I think going to be easier to do stuff like that because you'll have the technology will be there. I think the problem is it's actually possible today, but people just have to think that way. So for
Right.
example, when working with customers and we really want to get out of them, okay, what is it that you're going to see in the data that will make you care?
Right.
And when you care, what will you do?
Right.
And it's that what you do part that you just described, right? Well, I'll pick up the phone and I'll call Eric, or I'll need to see these other reports and I need to call a board meeting. You can
Right.
do those things today, but people don't really think of it that way. They just think, oh, I just need to look at the data, or I just need someone to give me a report, right?
Right.
And it's kind of burdensome just to have all that data there, right? Look through it and that's it. But the way
Yeah.
we've also evolved with some of the newer tools have taken us a little bit further into that cockpit idea that you described, where and streamlined the work, right? Because before you'd be in a meeting and someone would ask a question and it'd be like, I don't know, but I'll go find out. And then, you have to wait till the next meeting, whenever
Right.
that is.
Right.
Right now, you could just do that mostly right there. If you're equipped and if your organization functions that way, usually the data is available and you probably have the tool with someone right there who can find out the answer and you can actually do a triage without having to disperse and come back together. So I think
Yeah.
I think the pieces are there already.
Wow.
It's just more organizations don't operate that way because there's still a lot of them are just functioning the way they have
Right.
forever. They haven't really
Sure.
adopted.
And I'm sitting there smiling because I'm thinking to myself, I'm just imagining how this functionality is going to explode into different channels of the business. And think about Slack and Slack channels, where everyone's like, oh, hit me up on Slack. And not everyone uses it, but the people who do use it a lot, as opposed to email, for example. When you have an AI agent in the Slack channel monitoring things and then telling people, then, for example, your agent could be like, Lee, remember, we're meeting with Dave in an hour. Do you have that report ready? Or something like that. It's like, that is going to happen. You're going to see this stuff. You're going to have the AI agent in there, like just tracking along and saying, "Hey, did you forget to send that email to Judy?" and stuff like that. It's like, well, gosh darn, I sure did, because machines are very good at tracking that kind of stuff. Humans get all distracted. Machines, I mean, they can get overloaded, but they don't really get distracted. They're not like daydreaming. They do hallucinate. We got to watch out for that. But anyway, this is just crazy how things are going to change. And I think data products are what these things are. Basically, they are very, very sophisticated data products. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking to Lee Feinberg of DecisionViz and David Mariani of AtScale. And we're talking about data products and why they matter and why you should care. And David, I'll throw it back over to you. I do think that we're going to go through a period of disruption, but we're going to be trying to find ways to make all this stuff fit. And the data warehouse is going to stay. The ERP is obviously going to stay for a long time. I think they are both in the long-term crosshairs in terms of how they get done and how much effort and time is put into it and how much money vendors can charge for it, right? Because from a certain perspective, a business can only pay so much for software. And a lot of it's going to the cloud. The big cloud guys are absorbing things. I mean, this is all sort of, we went from CapEx to OpEx, and it's kind of hard to get the CapEx anymore because they just stopped doing business that way. But what do you think about the sort of near-term changes in data products from a practical perspective? Like, what do you recommend for your clients as you talk about all these new things? How should they go about tackling this stuff?
Yeah, well, you think about it, right? And the big focus has been, at least in the past 5 years or so, is a lot of enterprises are moving their data to the cloud, and it's just about collecting it. And you think about it, it's like data is like this big old passive bucket of bits.
Hmm.
Um, and we have these tools that we invented, you know, almost 20 years ago now, that we like expect people to go point it at that big bit bucket and then be able to sort of derive some value from it. So I think you're right that that's just collecting the data in one place and is that doesn't really add a lot of value. It's great that it has to be there, and that's sort of a prerequisite. but then putting sort of some processing on top of it, in the form of an LLM. I mean, if you think about what we've done with Auto ML was just still pretty manual, right? It's like you got to have this brainiac data scientist who's got some very specific use case that he's training models for some specific outcome. I think LLMs really change all that in that
Mm,
we have the ability to sort of truly crawl that data. And like we said in the last segment, it's like it can be, you can have a conversation with your data. And that's really much more interactive and useful to be able to treat your data that way versus it's very, very passive and almost like, stone tools and knives compared to what I think we're going to see. But we
well,
still have more work to do. So you asked what's going to happen in the near term. I think in the near term, we do need to add semantics to the data. Because you can't have an LLM that is useful for your business if it can't understand the terminology of your business.
mhm,
So I do think that we have to go beyond just collecting the data. We have to add semantic information on top of it in the form of metadata so that we can then truly be able to have a conversation with data, which I think becomes that's probably a few years out. But we got more work to do in terms of prepping the data to make it available to do just what we talked about.
I think that's right. And Lee, I'll throw that over to you. I mean, you know a lot about data prep, about getting data ready to visualize. You don't want to visualize something, well, unless you've done some meaningful governance, unless you have some faith in the numbers that are in the spreadsheet that you're then going to show somebody. But what do you think about the just the changing dynamic in business? Because these LLMs have absolutely altered the perspective of executives, of frontline workers, of directors, of everyone. And some people view it as a distraction, which I understand, but I do think it is so important to at least start playing around with this stuff. But what are your thoughts on balancing the time of your team, data governance versus playing around with LLMs versus doing your standard reporting? Well, what advice do you give to your clients to help them stay on track?
I think it's a problem that's been around forever, right? As I mean, if you think about what happened when the internet became commercialized, it was a very similar situation, right?
Right.
Oh, where is this thing going to be? Do we care about it? Which we spend time on it. So it's clear that we're in a situation now where companies need to start understanding this, and it's a problem of how do you do that? I think the bigger issue is how do you get the employees exposed to it when companies are locking it down because they don't really have a policy in place for how people should use it. So it's off. So if I work for company X and I want to access it, I'm probably doing it at home. I'm not doing it with company information, hopefully. And I think most people probably aren't um, have enough initiative to go home and do this stuff, right?
Right. Right.
And
Or they're
so the
just
companies are
busy
gonna
when they
have
get
to
home.
figure out
Right.
how to get people up to speed. And it's a whole cycle of investing time, investing money. But I don't think they can do any of that until they have their own game plan, right? You don't just want to say people, oh, go and learn this without a purpose, right? It should be oriented around, okay, what do we need to know? What do you need to know as an employee? How to do with these capabilities specific to our business, right? Just knowing how to write a prompt to do, make my sentences sound better may not be helpful, right? I might need to
Hmm.
know how to do it to do analytics or some kind of automation. And I think that's got to come first, is the companies have to figure this stuff out before just throwing money at letting people, learn it or do things.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I will throw out one idea, and we kind of talked about this a bit already. I'll throw it back to Lee real quick, is comparison and contrast, summarization. These are incredibly good powers with these chat GPT and Gemini type tools. Like you could take two written reports, load them both and say, what's the difference between these two? And it'll tell you. And so as sort of an analyst adjunct or an analyst tool to augment an analyst's work, I think it should be side by side with a lot of things that you do just to check stuff. Now, granted, you are taking information, prompt, putting it into an LLM, right? So you got to think about that. Now, I know that, what was it? Who was it who said that? I guess it was the OpenAI guy when the Databricks conference was going on. I got him in a thread on Twitter, and the girl from Databricks was saying, "Oh yeah, you don't want to just throw your corporate data into an LLM like ChatGPT." And the guy from OpenAI got back and said, "Now you know we don't do that. So this and that." And I got back to him right away. I said, "What are you going to do about these hallucinations?" And he came back and said, "Remember, they're more of a feature than a bug." Right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
Oh
yeah, it's
boy.
you're not really going to get rid of
Right.
that sucker too quickly, but point being, Lee, there are lots of ways you can use these things to get value. And I think that to your point, companies have to sit down. Someone in the strategy office has to really sit down and talk to the teams and figure out, all right, what can we practically do that is not going to jeopardize our IP, that's not going to jeopardize, some other aspect of our organization. But you got to start playing with these things to recognize what they do. Because I think, and maybe this is the question you can answer, I think what we're going to see is these models get slotted into workflows, into very interesting workflows, like checking and validating things, right? Just ask it to check these two documents. Or what's different between them? Contract assessments, like loading two contracts. What's different about these contracts? Sections 2.4, 3.1, and 7.9. Like, okay, now I know what to go look at. I mean, it saves you tons of time in all kind of ways, right, Lee? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think from those perspectives, I mean, I don't know about contracts because I don't do them very often, but you read stories about how it would be pretty good for something like this. I can give an anecdotal experience I had using one of Google's products, their notebook tool, and I think about 20 different documents in there, all around data storytelling, data literacy, in that came out of Gartner and companies like that, McKinsey, and it just mashed it all together. And I had my own little, like LLM from that. And I was able to really dive in and ask questions, summarize it, give me key points out of it. So I was able to do a business analysis on all those reports. It would take me forever to read through all those. And in,
That's right.
20 minutes, probably, I had the essence of what I needed to use. And that is I probably wouldn't have even done the exercise because I would have
Right.
seen it as it would just take too long.
I mean, that's such a good way to describe it, right? So that's an opportunity cost. You wouldn't have even done it if it weren't for these tools. And I'll just give you guys, you may have seen this in the news. This is just, oh, it's soul crushing. There's this article about this port in Peru that was financed through China's Belt and Road program. And apparently, some bureaucrat in Peru didn't read the fine print and they dropped some ball, and now China owns it. And they're all nervous about this. It's like, oh, what happened there? Load that sucker into an LLM and just ask it for what is the fine print? What do I have to watch out for? I mean, wow. Can you imagine how unhappy someone is when they realize, okay, you just lost control of this $3.6 billion port, bro? Dave, I'll get you to comment on that.
Yeah, well, you know what I also sometimes think about that. We already know what a productivity boost this technology is. And I know there's a lot written, and there's a lot of anxiety about, is it going to replace humans? And I was just listening to a podcast today with, Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, and he made a very good point, which is that technology basically is it's a net job booster. It's a net job
Right.
provider. If you look at it at a micro level, yeah, somebody might lose their job if over sort of this technology, but to think that, you give people back time, it doesn't mean that you shrink your workforce. That would
Right.
assume companies have run out of ideas. So
Right.
if we're allowing companies to make more money, then it's not like we're out of ideas and we're just going to continue to shrink. And shrink the workforce. We're going to do more, and so
Right.
we're going to create bigger companies with and take bigger risks and create a bigger economy. And so that's what's happened over the years with any kind of technology disruption, is that it's boosted net employment, not detracted from it. So I just see that, this is like such a productivity boost And you talked about comparisons and comparisons. That's a great one too. It also is great for finding outliers or finding driving factors. Like, I want to know what is driving sales for this particular product. Well, these are the factors that drive the sales of that product the most. It's when you promote it during this time of year or when you sell it in these two colors. It's just allows people to sort of get to an answer that's an actionable answer a lot faster than they could without the technology, where they literally had to hunt and peck
Right.
and hope that they would stumble upon an answer.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. And Lee, I'll throw this one over to you. You and I were talking the other day, and I was saying that in my opinion, these foundational models are eventually going to subsume most of what is now enterprise technology. Not everything. It's going to start with things like customer support and obviously with marketing, content, and things of this nature. But one of the good points is they are consensus engines. So they're not really good for innovating on things to talk about. They're really just giving you the average of what has been talked about based upon the prompt. And that's a very, very important thing to understand. So it's good for the meat of an article, let's say, but it's not good for the lead. It's not really good for the conclusion. It's not good to kind of keep it spiced and interesting, although it uses lots of action verbs, delve. It's time to delve into. If you see the word delve, probably an AI engine that wrote that. It loves the word delve. But
Quagmire.
Quagmire's another one. It's good Scrabble words, right? Like use only Scrabble words that score 20 points or higher. Like, let's see if that one passes muster. But I'll just throw it at you and say, I think what's going to happen, just like Dave is suggesting that employees have to upskill, the vendors have to upskill as well, right? The vendors have to embrace this stuff, especially any BI or analytics vendor. You better embrace the heck out of this surfboard, or it's going to knock you in the head as you fall into the waves. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the area that I spend most of my time in is in business intelligence. And, what we're trying to do is with our clients is we're really trying to move them off of these, they used this word before, these data heavy dashboards, right? That are just, they're very difficult to navigate. And so
Right.
we're really trying to help them figure out what is the story that they want from that. And I think where and we treat that as a product. That's kind of the data product we think about is how do you build these out as products? And I think the augmentation aspect that we've been discussing is very relevant to that because as I develop this kind of data story, these tools can actually then go in and maybe verbalize it,
Mhm.
right? Or do that next layer of analysis for me. Okay, I see something here that's making me get a little antsy. Either it's an opportunity or there's a problem I need to handle, right? There's both sides of that I need to care about. And then maybe I can send off this agent or something else to do some work for me
Hmm.
to because I don't even know the questions to ask maybe if I'm not that analytical, but I know what I care about in the business and I know what looks good and I know what looks bad. So I
Right.
think there's some opportunities there too to improve the way the work gets done. But it's again, it's like side by side, right? It's
Right.
my companion
Yeah, that's
versus
exactly right.
it's not
That's it.
replacing me or the
That's
people
right.
necessarily that need to think through that.
That's exactly right. We'll pick that up after the break, folks. Stand by. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking to Lee Feinberg of DecisionViz. I got it quickly that time. DecisionViz, that's a VIZ, and David Mariani of AtScale. And we're talking all about data products. And we're really talking all about LLMs because guess what? They're very, very cool. And they are going to change the way things are done. And, gosh, like 6 months ago, I kept talking about interactive AI. We even did a show on it, and no one really knew what we were talking about. Now, what's happened is that what I thought of as interactive AI has been labeled AI agents. And so at Booming World, they were talking about building a registry for AI agents, which sounds like a pretty interesting idea,
Mm.
where you have them check in every so often. Okay, what are you working on? What are you working on? That kind of thing, because this is very powerful and it can solve all kind of problems. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I'll throw this over to Lee first, maybe. I want to go to California for a few days. I only want to spend $500 for the flight and the hotel. I don't know exactly when I want to go. Could you just find something for me? and just ping me when you found it and enter and like ding, ding, ding. They just fly off and go do their thing and look around and then bing, you get an alert on your phone. Oh, how about this flight? Yes, that's the one I want done. Because even now with all the technology we have, it takes a while to book a flight. I mean, it takes like 20, 30, sometimes 40 minutes if you're getting distracted and things are happening because you're just like, no, 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 I only want one. No, it's too much. Other airports or whatever. But these AI agents, I mean, who knows what they can do? We don't really know. But Lee, I'll throw it over to you. To me, that's a huge productivity gain. I think we need to be focused on the mundane, the tedious, the stuff like you referred to as burdensome. That's where we want the AI agents to do their thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if I pair it back with that example we were talking about before, where someone's say in a meeting and they see something that they care about and it kicks off an action, right? And so that action is what? And it's defining those actions that people, I think, have to care about. They may know what they are because maybe it's in their head, right? They know if I go back to my office, this is what I would do. And now it's about extracting those out and putting them into this new form, right, that we have, and understanding that workflow that's in somebody's head about what they do on their job, and that
Hmm.
can go through all levels. And so I think that's a huge area that you were alluding to as well about, how does someone package that up? How do they get into their meetings? And that's just a lot of that's just busy work, right?
Hmm.
You had to go into your calendar and find out, when the three of us could get together and what papers you had to pull together. If you could have something do all that, it frees up my time to actually think rather than spending time just getting stuff together. And I think that goes back into almost not even taking someone's job away. You're just taking away the part that I don't like to do anyway,
Yeah, right.
and letting me
Because who
really
likes
do
that?
my job, which is what you're paying me to do.
Right. I mean, I think that's very, very true. And David, I'll throw it over to you. I've noticed in Google, because I'm a big Google Docs guy, Gmail, and all that kind of stuff. It was a couple years ago now that they started finishing your sentences for you. So that was the early warning sign that here comes this stuff right now. But the other thing they do is they notice when I'm sending an email, let's say to Nicole at your company, it'll say, "Do you want to add these other people?" Because guess what?
Hmm.
It's seen those other people on these threads before.
Hmm.
And so that's a pretty simple algorithm sitting back there, just noticing, okay, when he hits this person, he's probably gonna hit these other people. That's another productivity gain. I mean, these are really interesting things that are happening. Sometimes, I mean, people still do get a little nervous about the privacy side of things. And, as I said at the Data Universe conference, privacy is actually dead. I mean, de facto, privacy is dead. Now, it doesn't mean we
Absolutely.
shouldn't strive towards it. We shouldn't have governance programs and privacy and security and all these different things. That's all still well and good. But just understand that really, unless you don't have a phone, never walk on the street in a city, never use a computer, your privacy is out the window. But what do you think about these little gains and how they make a big difference?
Yeah, well, it's like, the best AI is the AI that you don't know you're using, right? It's
Right.
like because it's so integrated in your course of work and the applications you do. It's just a helper, right? It doesn't have to be in your face, and it's only a chatbot interface, and it's like screaming at you, "Here I am, I'm AI." So those are good examples of something that are just in line that make you more productive. But what I like I've in terms of these AI agents, I've used the ones that I like the most are ones that they'll give you an answer or help you out with something, but they'll tell you where they got the data from, because sometimes that's actually more interesting in the answer. It's like, and that allows you to go and it's like a second order of value, where you might actually go, oh, that's interesting. You got that data from there. I'll ask a follow-up question about that. So
Right.
you said you had a great example of that, right? It's like, well, yeah, here's my answer, and I only have a 59% confidence level. Well, why do you have only 59% confidence level? Because the data is missing this and that and that. That's a second order sort of a value that is really probably more valuable than the original question that you
Right.
asked.
That's
Uh,
right. That's
yeah.
exactly right. I mean, good God, like, troubleshooting, I'll throw this over to you, Lee, and even in a dashboard that you built somewhere. I mean, one of the the hurdles people run into in Tableau is the filters that someone may have applied that you don't know about. There's a lot of bells and knobs underneath the covers that the end user doesn't see in the
Mhm.
visualization. And yes, we're getting better about being able to drill down into them to understand. But the thing is, man, these large language models, even these small language models, the point is foundational models have millions, sometimes billions of parameters that get trained with various weights and biases. And guess what? They're really good at picking up on stuff. So when you load some document in there, I mean, I don't know if it's to the point yet where it can compare a dashboard necessarily, but it can certainly compare code. If you get a giant code base here, giant code base there, load them both in, as long as you're inside the context window, well, guess what? It can tell you things. It can say, yes, this is going to run faster because of XYZ. This is going to run slower. I mean, that is just crazy important stuff. But to your point earlier, it's a co-pilot. It's your companion. It's not going to take over for you or shouldn't anytime soon, but it can be incredibly useful as like your little dog who's always there to warn you when the bad guys are coming or something. I mean, it's like right out of storybooks that as a companion, it's just outstanding, right, Lee?
Yeah, I think you've seen companies demonstrate this kind of capability already, right? Just because you mentioned it, Tableau, right? They showed off how this was starting to shape up in their product. So you could be using and building a worksheet, and then at the same time, you've got their tool sitting on the sidebar, and you start asking it questions. So it's giving you an additional insight into what you're already looking at by asking the right questions, and then it can look at that specific set of data. So
Right.
for example, you might look at something and it's either averaged or maybe it's surface level data, and then you could say that doesn't look right, and ask it to go a little bit deeper right there. So you're already seeing that kind of capability come in, and it's not prompts, right? It's just basic language, um, almost like you're having a conversation with a friend. I don't think it's made quite that way yet because it's a data world. It's still
Right.
got some specifics to it, and I think you'll have to work out some of the nuances of getting people comfortable with that. I mean, as an analyst, you might be, but again, if you're an executive, you're not used to working at that level, and I think it requires some training and on how to do that and some thinking.
Hmm.
It's training on thinking. You get into that whole area of whether it's data literacy or some analytic training that maybe people didn't have before. So it's kind of maybe by enabling them to do something, you may actually have to give them experiences in other spaces too to not just take the information at face value as well.
Hmm. That's interesting. All right, you know what? We're coming up at the end of this segment, and podcast bonus segment is up next. I'm going to throw out my final question to both Dave and Lee here in the rest of this segment, and we'll talk about it in the podcast bonus. The same way that a lot of companies, software companies, had to refactor their software to run for Kubernetes, for example. That's the term they use is refactor. You take a monolithic application, you break it down into services. I mean, we learned this lesson years ago with service-oriented architecture, so it's not new to us, but it's very similar to that. But I think in much the same way that many software vendors have had to refactor their software to run in Kubernetes, we're going to see the same kind of movement as companies try to refactor in order to fit into layers in a RAG model around a large language model. Because I do think these models, these foundational models, are the new centers of gravity. They're almost more like operating systems than anything else. And you're going to have like a semantic layer, for example, from AtScale be very useful in this process for kind of training the LLM of where to go, whether you hit it on the way out towards the LLM and or on the way back. There are different architectural approaches you can take to really suss this stuff out and to optimize the accuracy of these things. But that is my big prediction is that many companies in the data space and elsewhere are going to have to refactor to think about how they're going to fit into a RAG architecture around a foundational model. We'll be right back for the podcast bonus. You're listening to DM Radio. For All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here today. Big thank you to David Mariani of AtScale and Lee Feinberg of DecisionViz for just agreeing to dive right in and go in any direction on this topic because it's very fun. But Dave, in my last segment, I threw out this theory I have that A lot of software companies are gonna have to refactor their technology to fit into like a RAG architecture or some LLM workflow. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think they have to refactor their data, right? And what that means is that it's not just about putting it in one place in the cloud. They need to have a comprehensive governance infrastructure that's
Yeah,
operationalized. I mean, you can't if you really truly want to democratize access to that data, which is the second piece of it. You got to make it available in new forms. It can't be just within Tableau or Excel. It's
right.
got to be in Slack or Teams. But it needs to have governance built in because otherwise if there's too many special cases that are going to stop you from making that data available because you're not going to trust who it is available to. So,
Hmm.
and then finally, yeah, you have to have a semantic layer because you got to have business semantics that allows for some human curation that can apply semantics to that technical data that makes it understandable and consumable by a language model. So that's what I would say, Eric, is that you need to have governance, you need to have semantics, and you need to have new ways of querying the data that are going to be available to everyone, not just data experts.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you mentioned before about data science and how the data scientist was really this person vaulted to the highest echelons of the world. And I do understand that. I definitely understand the value of having someone who really understands diffusion models and algorithms and different things and how they work. But now you don't need that as much with these new technologies because you can just give yourself the answer to things. It's really quite remarkable how it's going to really level lots of different playing fields in lots of different ways. But smart people will still be fine, and hardworking people are all still going to be fine. I think it's the people who are not so hardworking that maybe don't do so well. But who knows? But Leah, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think about this idea of having to refactor, or maybe not even just your software, but refactor how you think about things and how you think about your job and what you do every day? I mean, it's a different world out there. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I think this is very similar to what we experienced in when the new tools came out, like Power BI, Tableau, Click, where it opened up the world to people, frankly, like myself, who could work better with data. I don't know SQL, I don't know Python. I didn't have to, right? I could just click a button and I could connect, and it handled all that in the background. And it's very similar to what we're seeing now. I think where what you'll need to refactor, if you want to use that term, is the thinking of how people use data. And what I mean by that is I have a theory that the more access you provide people to data, the more innovation you can have in your company, the more value you get out of your company, but there's still a very limited scope of how much data people are able to access. And I think when you talk about these models, right, they probably require, I'll just pick on myself, right? If some company says Lee only has access to ABC today, that's very limiting in terms of what I can do, in terms of what I can analyze and understand, what kind of opportunities I can create. Now, if you want to give me this model, you've got to open this model up so that it can access more data for me as an individual. And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation for companies to have when they've been so restrictive over the years and they've spent tons of money on governance to limit it. I think they almost need to open, I don't want to say open
Mm,
everything up because
right.
that's probably not the right thing, but they need to dramatically widen access to what data I can have and use in my work.
Yeah. I think both of you gentlemen are right. I think we are at the precipice of very, very interesting times. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I do think that these foundational models will eventually subsume many different parts of traditional enterprise technology, but we'll see. I mean, the other shoes have yet to drop in lots of different ways. The costs of these things, how much it takes to train them, how stable are they over time? We don't really know. There are very strange things that happen. I keep joking about my buddy, Dr. Usama Fayyad, who was actually at Yahoo. I don't know if he was there when you were there.
He
David, he
was.
was, yeah, the first chief data officer, right?
Yep.
He said to me at the beginning of this year, these foundational models, they're too big. They're not supposed to work. We don't know why they work. It's like, okay, this guy knows more than anyone is telling us, and we don't even know. Okay, we don't know what the hell's going on. All we know is that they work. So it's actually one of my favorite quotes of all time. I'll end on this. Was my buddy Nikolai Menchikov, really smart guy. He actually wrote an email marketing application from scratch and using .NET in like 1999, which I used for like 8 or 9 years before iContact came out. So I've been doing digital marketing and email for like 25 years, which is like 3 times longer than most veterans. But he's a Russian. He said to me one day out of the blue, he goes, the funny thing about the web is that nobody know how it works. All we know is it works. Right? No, it's like,
That's
dude,
beautiful, isn't it?
isn't that funny?
Right.
Well, it's like ports, this port, that port, I mean, people have to get way into the weeds. And now we're starting to with all this observability stuff and Kubernetes and everything. We're starting to get into that, but good God, like even once you think you know how it works, it gets like the whole new layers of complexity just fire out at you. And it's just absolutely nuts. But this has been so much fun, gentlemen. Always fun talking to David Mariani of AtScale, and of course our new friend Lee Feinberg of DecisionViz. Look them up online. We'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to DM Radio.
Thanks, Eric.